So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth installment in a series of stakeholder and community meetings focused on Hingham Harbor and downtown, the sustainable vision study for those districts. And we're happy to present to you this evening. We have a small audience. I think we had a little trouble with the outreach for this meeting, but we're thankful to have a Zoom recording, and we'll be distributing that Zoom recording to the appropriate outlets and stakeholders so that they can participate and give us feedback. So the meeting is being recorded, just so everyone knows. We will use that recording, as I mentioned, to get the word out about the progress that we've made and gather some additional feedback from folks. I don't think I mentioned, I'm Josh Fiala, a principal planner at MAPC, joined also with other colleagues from MAPC, Yolando Spinola, our community engagement specialist, and Russell Wong, a land use intern with us at the agency. So happy to have them along this evening. So our agenda tonight, we'll zip through pretty quick so that the meeting and the recording are both brief. But the introduction, we're basically through already. We'll review quickly the feedback that we received from the last meeting, meeting number 4, which focused on public realm and open space improvements. And then basically have compiled in this meeting all of the vision and recommendations that we've covered in each of the last meetings to see how that looks as a set of information. And just to gather one last final round of feedback. But then from here, the next steps are basically to spend the next 2 months adding detail to those recommendations and try to get the town and the district stakeholders a package, which we heard at the very beginning of this process is needed in terms of actions that are prioritized, that are goal-oriented, working with the vision that's defined, but also actionable and implementable. So we'll be providing as much guidance as we can to make that happen. We'll, when we have some moments for comment, feel free to provide us with those comments. If not, if you would just kindly leave yourselves on mute so we don't have any audio issues, and we've got a small group so we can keep this pretty informal too as we're going along. So if you do have a comment or question, just please do interrupt and we'll get that accomplished. So we've been working with Mary, but Mary has departed from the town of Hingham at the planning department, sadly. We've been working now with Sherry Robertson and others in the town, helping to keep this process going. On our side too, we also have Ann Herbst, a senior regional environmental planner, who's not present with us this evening, but has been contributing behind the scenes as well. So happy to have the full team from our agency and from the town side of things as well, keeping this going. So overarching goals of this study are really to create a shared vision for the downtown and harbor area and how those two areas can work more cohesively together. And to do that, we're defining short and long-term recommendations focused on public realm and open space improvements, resiliency and sustainability recommendations and improvements, and then land use and zoning recommendations. So all of those 3 main categories we've been talking through in detail over the last series of meetings. And in this meeting, we're basically circling back and sharing the feedback that we've heard in the full compilation of goals within those 3 categories. The study area is on the screen, stretches up Route 3A along the Otis Street stretch of 3A, over to the Summer Street stretch of 3A and the roundabout with the wharves and the bathing beach, and then down North Street to Hingham Square and the historic downtown area. And you can see that outlined in yellow on the screen. We've started the process, when was that? Last summer, and started with an overall visioning process to define a vision statement for this shared district and then have spent the last few meetings more focused on the goals and strategies for each of those categories of the topic areas we're focused on. So we've been working through those and really have covered kind of all of the areas of tasks 1, 2, and 3 now, and are zeroing in on compiling all of this information in a draft report, which will be the focus of our work after this meeting. So we're nearing the end of the process. Has always been slated for completion in the month of May of this year. I think we're on target to do that. We have one final stakeholder and community meeting at the beginning of May to review the draft document specifically and go through that with you all. So the first, we have a poll just to see who's in the room with us tonight. It's a small room tonight, but that we also, as I mentioned, will have a companion online survey that goes along with this, and people watching the video of this can also submit to us what connection they have to the harbor or downtown area. So we're doing Zoom polls this evening. We have been doing in the past some poll everywhere surveys, but have had some false starts with that technology, especially with your group over this course of the meetings. So I'm switching to Zoom polls for tonight. Let me launch that for you now. And this is a list which is just based upon the stakeholders who have been present in previous meetings. So if you wouldn't mind, you should have the poll popped up onto your screen now. And you can click I think you can only choose one answer, but click the one that you most identify with. So it looks like we have a couple residents, the Harbor Development Committee and the Route 3A Task Force represented in our small group this evening. So let me end the poll. Just share that back with you so you can see it. So we will, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, we will be depending on the recording that's being made presently to share this a little more widely with the stakeholders on this list and the general public from the Town of Hingham's website, and invite people to participate in the poll, which will be a companion to that link of the presentation. All right, so let's move along now. So I first wanted to just start with a review of the feedback from the last meeting. So last meeting we had quite a few more stakeholders present in the live presentation, including residents, the Hingham Land Conservation Trust, residents sort of farther afield and near the downtown Hingham Harbor area, members of the Hingham Downtown Association, Route 3A Task Force, Harbor Development Committee, Master Plan Committee, the Historical Society, the trustees of the Hingham Bathing Beach, town staff more generally. So good, and that's been pretty consistent for this series of meetings that we've had. Members of these stakeholder groups well represented along the way. So that's been very great, and we thank you all for being a part of this process from start to finish. So we outlined at the last meeting the draft goals for the public realm and open space for this shared district to improve safety and decrease vehicular traffic speed, increase spaces devoted to people, strengthen resilience with improvements, integrate history, arts, and culture, and elevate the district identity and consistency. And those goals are a level down from an overarching vision statement, which has been crafted, and they're consistent and supportive of that vision statement. You'll see that vision statement a little bit later. And then we went through a series of a little more detailed strategies under each of those goals. So for example, under improve safety, decrease vehicular speed, we had a series of more detailed strategies, which then we asked the stakeholders present to weigh in on whether they thought it was a strategy they would agree with, they were neutral for, they disagreed with it, or they thought that it's an idea that had already been tried in the past here. So the first were the Route 3A improvements, which are being advanced with Mass DOT, and the design is, I believe, at about 75%, getting ready for capital improvement cycle, I think in the 2024 annual the Transportation Improvement Projects program. for the state. So that was, it's previously supported. It's a big part of what the activity is around the town, and it would have major impacts in terms of pedestrian safety and vehicular speed as Route 3A cuts through our district here. But then we also went through a series of recommendations that were recommended by the Central Transportation Planning Staff, CTPS, around shorter term Route 3A improvements, which include perhaps some road striping or other ideas, and suggested that those could be done, because 2024 is still a couple years off, that those could be done in the interim. And the people in that meeting agreed with that. About 87% agreed, 13% disagreed. We also suggested, excuse me, another strategy which was put forward in that same report from CTPS to add the Your Speed digital readout signs to the Otis Street portion of Route 3A, and that was actually supported a little less so, with 62% agreeing and 38% only neutral. And then also considering a reduction of the speed limit along that Otis Street portion of 3A. And again, similar percentages, 62% and 38% in terms of agreeing or neutral. And then we had a little bit bigger, more visionary idea, which I think was the idea that got the least support out of any of our discussions in this series of meetings, which was a discussion of some sort of overpass or pedestrian crossing, not at the grade level, for the Route 3A to get from the water side to the Hingham downtown district. And that was the least support, as I mentioned. So 43% agreed, 43% disagreed. That was a fair amount more disagreement than we'd seen in anything else. And 14% considered this already explored in some manner in the past. Increasing spaces devoted to people. We talked about exploring road diets for every street in the district. And that was also less supported. So 50% agreed, but 37% were neutral and 13% disagreed. And then identifying locations to strategically remove on-street parking. That was better supported at 71%. Then also identifying street segments that can become pedestrian only, perhaps temporarily or for an event. That was a little less supported at 62%. And using special events to test that pedestrian only use, also a little less supported at 62%. Then the other that won the category in terms of least support, I think, out of all of the various strategies, was the notion of adding resilience to the Route 3A stretch at the waterfront here and elevating it about 1,800 feet of it to provide greater sea level rise flood resilience. Only 50% agreed with that idea, 33% disagreed. And then sort of an alternative to that in terms of flood protection would be to integrate new amenities in a more incremental fashion that would provide flood protection through low height walls or berms or other elevated infrastructure that's not 1,800 feet of roadway. And that was more broadly supported with 86%. Then these were both fully supported, which I think was also a little unusual. We didn't have too many that was this high of support, but these are pretty good ones. Improvements should integrate stormwater enhancements throughout the district. So thinking about ways that can happen and giving direct guidance to the town for those stormwater enhancements, and leaning on our environmental planner, Ann Herbst, which will be giving us some insights into that in the reporting. And then improvements should integrate locations for new landscaping. And also similar there, we'll be speaking with Anne about specific ways that can occur. Then we had integrate history, arts, and culture, 100% agreeing that the linking of historic assets through a walking tour with wayfinding. This is just picking up really on an idea the town already has implemented in some cases. I think there's about 3 or 4 signs already out there. It's advancing that program and spreading it around the district. Integrating public art into public realm improvements, good interest and agreement in that, 75%. Then 87% agreeing that some simple design features should be consistently applied across the district. So whether that be sidewalk finishes, crosswalks, and the like. That's similar to the next idea in terms of elevating the district identity and consistency. 75% agree with continuing the streetscape character and moving those features throughout the district. So moving them in the transition area between Hingham Square and the waterfront, where those characteristics are a little less consistent, and making that consistent a feature of all of the portions of the district, and increasing uniformity and connectivity of the district overall. Deirdre, you have a question.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, Alonda. Thanks for the note. And thank you both so much. I think our attendance is hurting because, as you know, you don't have Mary's position hasn't been filled in town hall. So I know we were all scrambling for but it shouldn't, we amplify between Katie, Marco, Clark, Chris Daly, Gordon Carr, who's on the phone. We all represent committees of at least a half dozen people. So rest assured, we can go back and amplify your good work. Will the fact that we've participated in this project with MAPC help us, like for instance, on the wayfinding signage? And I'm anticipating, we definitely would want to acknowledge the native roots in Hingham. Will this make us more, or have a greater likelihood to be eligible for grants from the state? Or can you leave us with grant-making bodies that might hook us up with the funding to do some of these implementations?
Yeah, I think in not all cases, we'll be able to do that and make those suggestions where we know of grants that are available for the type of recommendation that we're making. I think there's not a one-to-one relationship with a grant program for all of these items, but where we do have knowledge of that type of program, I think we can certainly add that information into the more detailed kind of packaging of this that will occur with the drafting of the report.
That would be so great. It would save us a lot of, not looking in the right places if what those sources are. And then we certainly have volunteer power that can make the application, but that would be really valuable. Thank you.
Sure. And I think a process like this in the plan, which will result from it, is useful in the grant pursuit as well, because you can actually just kind of have that document be a part of your package, or at least take excerpts from it and have that be a part of your grant application to show that this is actually a thought out, proactive plan that you're implementing. So you're not just sort of, it's been gone through a community process. You have people who agree with where this is all headed. All of that stuff is good in terms of the grant awarding. All right, so let me just, I think and thank you for the note about the audience size too. We're also, we'll try to do better for the final meeting. I think that this will work out fine with the Zoom recording for this one, but we will try to also step up the outreach for the final session to make sure that people are able to join us live. And then lastly, in terms of elevating the district identity and consistency, developing and deploying consistent wayfinding signage, that was very well supported and makes a lot of sense, particularly as it relates to parking in the district. And then expanding district branding of some kind, a district logo, I think we mentioned, or other features which could be integrated, was less supported, 57%, and then 43% were neutral on that one. So that was basically the conclusion of what we had gathered. If you recall, we went through each of the various major goals and strategy, had suggested strategies for each major goal, and then put them up as sort of test pilot ideas with the group over the course of the last few meetings. And then now tonight, what we've done is basically taken all this information, we've streamlined it based upon that feedback and put it together basically in outline form for the draft report, which now we'll be adding a lot of detail to in terms of, like was just suggested, one example, grant sources where they're known, or adding more detail about how to actually get from that idea to the next steps about what needs to happen. So the organization of those elements in whole is here on the screen. So you have the vision statement, which is just shown as a very kind of summary statement in this case. And then we do have the goals across land use and zoning, resilience and sustainability, public realm and open space. And then each of those goals have underneath them the more detailed strategies, which we'll be mostly concentrating on in terms of the detailed information for the draft report. And so what you see in the little box there, we had proposed 14 pilot ideas for land use and zoning. And in terms of the responses in the meeting polls, we've only included 11 of those given the amount of support that they got. So there's already been a little bit of winnowing and prioritization that's occurring. For the resilience and sustainability, we only had 7 proposed, but almost all of those were pretty well supported. So we've kept 6 of them. And then for the public realm and open space improvements, as you saw from that summary of the last meeting, we had 16 proposals, but quite a few of them actually didn't have much support or agreement behind them. So we've dropped off 6 of those and have 10 in total that are still included. So that, I think, has been a nice way to focus our materials on where the support is and what the community actually, what you all as stakeholders of the districts want to see. We've gone through this in previous meetings a few times now, so I won't dwell on it here, but here's the vision statement in its full form. This will be, again, we're basically, we may refine it a little bit based upon how it is feeling in the final report, but it's pretty close. And then everyone will get a chance once that report is drafted to make comments if you want to do some final wordsmithing, or you read it again and something isn't quite right. You'll have a chance to take a look at that again. But it sets the mark, it sets the frame for how this district is hoping to evolve based upon all of your feedback and conversation in this process. And I think is useful to have a statement such as this to refer back to, because there will be activities that come along that are not contemplated in the work of this planning process. And then you can refer those contemplations back to this vision statement and say, okay, well, is that sort of consistent with what we were thinking here for the vision? Is it less consistent? Is it more consistent? Should we proceed anyway, even though it wasn't specifically called out in the plan? It gives you that relief valve to think about things. So let's get into the compilation of these. And I'm in the upper right corner of the slides. We're just kind of tracking in that hierarchy where we are within these ideas. So now we're at the goal level for the land use and zoning goals. So these are the overall goals. We're really looking to diversify activities and attractions across the district to make sure that this district is a destination for any number of reasons, multiple reasons for people to visit. We're trying to diversify those reasons and make sure that they're attractive to people, including in goal number 2, expanding the real asset of the waterfront itself and making sure that the waterfront activity is there to supplement the other downtown activities. It's a unique situation to have both waterfront and downtown almost co-located. And then elevating and emulating the historic patterns of the district, making sure that what's really been an excellent legacy and stewardship of preservation in Hingham is elevated and emulated, both with future investments, but also in terms of those destinations and activities. And then there's, as has been evidenced throughout this process, so many great stakeholders and stewards of these areas, and continuing to coordinate that stewardship together is a big part of, I think, the future success here. And then for resilience and sustainability, we have strengthening the vitality and sustainability through new investments, making sure each new investment is contributing to the sustainability of the district, making sure that sustainability is addressed through the buildings, through the sites and landscapes of the district, but then also strengthening resilience with each improvement as well. So having concrete ways, as has been done with some of the recent improvements along the bathing beach, where you integrate a resilient wall within a beach restoration or a resilient wall next to a multimodal path, those types of resilience improvements. And then for the public realm and open space goals, improving the safety still and decreasing vehicle speed, a top priority. We've heard again and again, making people feel comfortable walking and biking around the district, increasing the spaces that are devoted to people for outdoor activities, outdoor dining, public spaces and the like, and then integrating history, arts, and culture into the public realm and open spaces and really highlighting those as features. And in so doing, elevating the district identity and consistency across all parts. So one of the things we want to do now with the questions we have this evening is just do a little bit of meta prioritization. We're now hopefully winnowed down on things that really matter to the stakeholders. but it'd still be great to know what we should be highlighting in the plan as we're drafting it all together, to see if there's one or two or three things that really should pop up as top priorities. We've heard some of those along through the process, but it's just good to reinforce that. So one example for sure is that we heard a lot about the walking and biking as a priority. So let me bring up this poll. So basically you have all of the goals, which I've just talked through, 1 through 10, and just pick the one that you think is the super critical item. If we outlined the grant source and you were able to connect with the grant funding, in the next couple months and really get some stuff accomplished, what would it be? And as I mentioned, for those who might be viewing the recording after the meeting, we have an online poll, which will make sure the link is evident on the town website, and you can answer these same questions and give us that feedback as well.
Can I ask a dumb question? So you just said the thing about walkability, and also, like, I had mentioned in the past, just the accessibility of downtown to public transportation, which isn't really reflected anywhere, but I guess maybe we decided that was only, maybe not, I don't know. But anyway, where would the walkability thing, or the bikeability, walkability, where does it fit in these goals?
Yeah, I think it's squarely within goals 7 and 8. So in both of those are really focused on improving the vehicular conditions so that it is safer for people to walk and bike, and then adding spaces that are devoted to people in the public realm so that they're comfortable. And Katie, actually had the same thought about where to fit in the access to public transportation and sort of multimodal access to the district in general. And so we might have to do a little adjustment in goal 7 so that has a better resting place. But I have a diagram later in this presentation that contemplates that a little more directly too.
Great, thanks.
I think that's huge, Josh. I think that keeps coming up in a lot of other meetings, that especially, if Hingham post-COVID can, sometimes it has a habit in the summer, it empties out. And if we don't get visitors, and visitors can't get to this area from the train or the boat without the last mile.
Well, we'll pause when we get to that diagram I prepared later in this presentation and see if you think it starts to strike the right tone in terms of the solution there or not.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wish it was in the vision somehow. Like, I read through the vision pretty carefully and I didn't really see it reflected at all. And I kind of think, I know we're a tiny group and I'm one voice, but like, we're the group who's been coming every week and it's pretty important to me. So I would maybe like to see it kind of tweaked in there somehow.
Okay.
Josh, this sounds like it might be another project maybe in the future. Mary Savage Dunn and I had talked for quite some time when I was on MAPC's committee as a rep for Hingham about figuring out a way to repurpose the right-of-way railroad that's down on Buell Street. So that would run from the shipyard to downtown. And that would be a really interesting project potentially to make it more accessible by bicycle from the shipyard. Anyway, future project perhaps.
That's a great idea. When we get to that diagram, we should make sure that we know where that's marked on the map. So we'll add that in. That's a great idea. I agree with all those comments. I think that the multimodal, yeah, we should tweak the goals in the vision statement. I think so. Multimodal access to the district shows up because I agree we have talked about that a lot, and it's not as squarely represented here as some of the other things we have talked about a lot. So that's great feedback. And just by the way, this process, in terms of the sort of intended audience, when Mary first set up this process and worked with us, kind of thinking through the sequence of meetings and things, she told me that what she wanted to do was not have like a established committee for this process, but to actually just invite all of the really relevant stakeholders, which I think are you all, and you've been very present for each of these. And then to have each of those meetings of stakeholders be open community public meetings, which is exactly what we've done. And that she always just said the right people will show up, and it seems to have been the case. So that's exactly, I think, what's happened. So I think that the right voices are in the room, hopefully, and helping to craft these priorities. So it looks like everyone has answered except for one person. So let me just end this while we've been talking and share it back to you all. So it looks like strength and vitality and sustainability, increasing spaces devoted to people, and then elevating the district identity and consistency and expanding waterfront activity. So those, and we'll review all of this against the notes we have of the previous meetings as well, just to make sure that the right types of priorities are being elevated as we start to weave all of these ideas together in the draft report. All right, so I'll stop sharing that and move back to the presentation real quick. So on that, moving down the hierarchy into the strategies, what we decided was that the winnowing of strategies, the cutoff point was having agreement with the group that we've been working with, which in some meetings, I think we've been averaging more, closer to probably about 20 people in meetings in the past. So this one is a little bit of an anomaly. But in those meetings, if we didn't have 70% of those folks in the meetings agreeing with that type of approach, then we basically have let that idea go and focused on the things where there is much more agreement and support around. So we use that as the cutoff point. So strategies that did not make that cutoff point are listed on this slide. And so we had thoughts in previous meetings about increasing amenity for recreational boating, defining a parking management plan. A lot of people had said there's been a lot of activity around that in the past unsuccessfully. We mentioned some of the others in this preview or in this meeting review already, this meeting. So the speed aspects of the Otis Street portion of Route 3A, the pedestrian overpass crossing, road diets, and then some of the others that we've already talked about in this meeting. So all of those basically got left off. I think they'll probably I'm not sure how much of the notes and process of all this. We'll probably have some sort of appendix where those show up as ideas that were talked about but left off, but they won't be prioritized or showcased in the draft report, really. So the strategies that are showcased or will be showcased in this draft report are on the screen now, and that includes some of the percentages of agreement that we saw. So you can see these were much better supported. So in terms of that first goal under land use and zoning, these are the strategies: developing a vacant storefront program. I hear that there's less issues with vacant storefronts today. There's even been some new businesses opening during the pandemic. But that's always in a downtown district with storefronts. It's always something to keep strategies on the front burner for when they're needed and make sure that there's an approach to that. And then expanding arts and cultural activity. I know there's already activity occurring, but just keep adding that activity and keeping it going. We had some also zoning suggestions for that, and then linking historic assets with wayfinding and info. And so here's a little bit more detail, which is not, starts to outline the type of thing that we'll be discussing in this draft report, in some cases with some of the examples that we'll highlight. But you can see that some of the ideas there that bring those strategies to life. And so connecting with, I guess in this case, there are some types of grant sources and resources already identified and sort of built into some of these bullet points. And others might involve sort of follow-on processes, such as thinking about the arts and culture activity in terms of a cultural district in working through a process with the Mass Cultural Council to designate this area as such. And then there would be potentially some benefits from that as well in terms of tourists, in terms of potential other funding sources. And then identifying the historic assets and destinations with information and some ideas about how to expand the program of wayfinding and signage, which is underway towards the waterfront already. So I'll just keep clicking through these because there are quite a few. And if you want to raise some discussion about any one of them, just interrupt. So the next are about expanding waterfront activity. We had discussed the proposition of allowing sit-down restaurants by special permit, more on the waterfront. So that might be an option. Partnering with water-dependent users to maximize activity, including the Hingham Maritime Center, and then additional design, programming, and event opportunities, both on the waterfront and connecting to it. So you can see some of the detail there. So looking at the Hingham Harbor overlay and potential town-owned properties, which are not, there are town-owned properties along the waterfront that are not open space. There will be some, there's always intricacies in terms of the Chapter 91 regulations and waterfront uses, but that might be able to be worked out. And then the Maritime Center activities, which they were a participant in some of our meetings, and bringing that, making sure that those activities and connections are real, are very strong between other downtown activities and the users that they bring to the district. And they're mentioning that there could be a partnership around parking, and that parking is really one of their limiting factors. And working with the Commonwealth to improve the boat ramp. I know there's been some ongoing discussions around that. Coordinating activity at the marinas, the bathing beach, and the wharf activity we were talking about before this meeting started as well, are all major conversations occurring in the town presently. Then on the design and programming aspects of things, the Hingham's Farmers Market, continuing the slate of improvements at the various parks and monuments along the waterfront and the wharves themselves. And then providing amenities for all seasons and activities for all seasons and in inclement weather as well, with the appropriate lighting and flexible items and storage and all of the supporting needs. So we'll get into some of the details around how we think that could be made actionable. Deirdre, did you have a question on this?
Yeah, could you just clarify me back at 2.1? So if there is town-owned property that is labeled open space, this is where you could do a special permit for some type of pop-up restaurant or something?
No, I think you would want to avoid the town that's designated as the town land that's designated as open space would not be the target for this sort of situation, but I believe there are other portions of town-owned land along the waterfront that are not designated as open space. I'm not sure exactly what what the history is of that land or what its use is specifically, but you could, on that land, there's a whole extra process of disposition that would have to occur if it's designated open space. The town has to go through a lot of hoops to do that for good reason. But for land that's not designated open space, the town could contemplate things like not necessarily selling the property, but a scenario of like a long-term land lease. If a waterfront restaurant was really desirable and it were, first, I think the zoning change would have to occur to even enable and allow that. But that's the type of thing that could add a destination to the waterfront, or use an activated space which is currently inactive there. It's maybe not the sort of lowest hanging fruit or nearest term
Yeah,
endeavor.
yes, right.
But it's something that you might set those dominoes up for a future improvement.
Thank you.
Marco, yes.
Josh, so am I right in thinking that maybe now should be a good time to put in place some of these potential permits or regulations to allow permits? So for example, if there was a private property owner on the waterfront who wanted to build a small restaurant, I would guess today that's probably not allowed. But if the town put in place a zoning regulation or something, right, that would allow that, now might be a good time to do it, even though nobody's thinking about it, right?
Yes, so that would also apply here. I think my presentation is focused, maybe wrongfully so, on the town-owned properties, but there are also some private-owned properties on the waterfront too. And so, yes, one of those properties could be contemplated for a restaurant use. And I think what we'd want to do is still, why we suggested special permit to make that change would be to still allow the town some ability to say no if it's not the right type of use or the type of location. But to put that out there as we heard a fair amount in the brainstorming portions of this process, where we were just having more open-ended discussions with you all, that having the ability to eat on the waterfront and enjoy those views would be a really big draw and a destination use. And so there's not much of an open door for that type of scenario today. So creating the moves through zoning to make that a little more of an open door would be appropriate.
May I say something? Clark Fraser.
Yes, Clark.
Moneybriar Circle, Hingham. You do have the wharfs. At least one of them, a couple of them have no use, but there are a lot of issues with parking and even competition with existing restaurants. But there are, I think there'd be a lot of pushback if you further block off the view from the road along the beach. But on the wharfs, you wouldn't have that problem.
That's a great point. All right, so I think we had a few people join us perhaps, but so we're just going through the overall compiled strategies, which have been winnowed down from the previous meetings based upon the amount of agreement and support that was expressed for each of those pilot ideas previously. And you can see in the upper right corner, there's a little diagram which shows you that we're kind of at the strategy level, which is that bottom level, and we're working through land use and zoning presently. So also in land use and zoning, we have strategies under elevate and emulate historic patterns. And so the first strategy there is to explore district design guidelines that could attach to the overlay zone of the district today, and then adjust zoning for several uses that are inconsistent with the district vision. And here's a little more detail on what we're thinking there and what we would outline in the draft report. So we would outline district design guidelines that would focus on the primary building facade and its orientation to the street with a generously landscaped front setback, which is would define some of the features which would be consistent with the historic development patterns you have there. I think focusing on slope roofs is important. That's a pretty prominent feature of the historic architecture. Talking about, as you see in the photograph there, some gable ends and dormers that break up the roof and reinforce that orientation to the street, reducing and concealing parking to the rear side of structures. These are all pretty standard and typical types of guidelines, but would make sure that people understand or developments that coming forward investing on property would be more consistent with the historic patterns of the district. And then on 3.2 there, some of those uses are leased parking, auto filling stations, auto repair, sales room for auto dealers. So it's basically to adjust the zoning so that more of those types of uses would not be allowed in the future. So you'd be moving those to prohibited uses. You do have some of those uses currently, auto filling stations, for example. It would not impact those current uses which are on the ground operating today. They would be grandfathered uses. So there shouldn't be hopefully concern or pushback from those current users.
Josh, I just wanted to add, when you're doing your write-up on that, there was a period of when during the commercialization of Hingham Harbor where it was the auto dealership strip.
I saw that.
So, so I just think like maybe emphasizing for the way it's envisioned to be used in the future, like, cause trying to dodge someone saying, well, that was historic, and it just, this means a lot to me. This was my late father driving me through the harbor and pointing out these filling stations saying, worst zoning ever, worst zoning ever. So,
Yeah, no, I was, I don't know where I stumbled across those, but I saw some of historic images also
Yeah.
where, on Route 3A there, it was the auto strip. So the gas stations are a holdover from that. The dealerships are no longer there. But it makes sense, I think, for the zoning to evolve with the vision of the district for sure.
Josh, Marco here. If you could add into the final report also some recommendations that might ease the transition. So for example, as we move to electric cars, you're probably not going to need as many filling stations, right? So if there's some kind of regulation we could enact to basically motivate the existing gas station owner to maybe repurpose that land into, let's say, a restaurant with a roof deck overlooking the harbor. That might be really interesting. So you sort of carrot and stick approach, right, to incent people.
Yeah, we can look into that. And
That would be good.
the redevelopment of gas stations is sometimes a tricky matter because they have, of course, fuel underneath the ground there. So that's something that we can perhaps provide some sort of best practices around redevelopment of those types of properties.
We know about that. It's happened twice already.
Yeah, well, if there's fuel under the ground, it has to be removed because that's a sensitive area environmentally. And then there's one other thing you need to keep in mind, whatever you do, that the area behind 3A, if the water gets in there, it can't get out very quickly.
Right. I don't mean to get myself into trouble or misspeak there, but what I mean is all gas stations have holding tanks underneath the gas tanks themselves, which the fuel is stored within. I have no indication that those holding tanks aren't working properly in these sites. I don't mean to suggest that there's a fuel leak or anything of that nature. But
No, I was just saying if they do leak, we'll have an environmental disaster.
Yes, that is a concern. All right, so I will move along there. We'll add some of that discussion as best we can. And then rounding out the land use and zoning strategies are under continuing coordinate stewardship. So there was interest in continuing, I think, the coalition of partners that really have been present throughout this process with us and meeting regularly to advance the needs of the district. Further empowering management of the district through exploration of a business improvement district. So that was something I actually haven't heard on the results of that still, but something I think the town actually applied for a grant through the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative. But I do know that those are being awarded soon if they haven't already been. And then the definition of additional events and coordination of events and programming to attract visitors. Some of the details around those ideas. So I'm not sure how formal of a process it needs to be, but just sort of defining those key stakeholders. And I think as a implementation activity, what we'll recommend is that there would be some, I'm not sure the appropriate frequency, but that there would be a follow-on meeting perhaps after we've left this process, that those stakeholders could meet and continue on with this effort. And then hopefully it would be great if that grant came through from the Downtown Initiative, because number 4.2 would be really aided by that grant, and you could advance that quite a ways. But there's been a lot of success. We listed Amherst there as a recent success with the Business Improvement District, and it would give a lot of additional tools to the the management and improvement of these areas. And then the slate of events, which needs to be sort of fully coordinated and combined with everything that happens on the waterfront, everything that happens downtown. When we get back to those points of having parades and the in-person gatherings, of course, but just making sure that there's kind of a reason to visit at any season, and making sure that those are promoted and coordinated. So we'll pause there, and as we did with the goals, I'll pull up a poll that asks about sort of a meta prioritization of these strategies, and we have about 10 strategies in total. And so if you have one that you think makes a lot of sense as the thing to sort of tee up and move on as a really viable next step for the district to keep momentum going, we'd love to hear that. And we'll see how we might want to treat, if there are some very clear priorities at this level, we might treat some of those a little bit differently in terms of the final write-ups. So it looks like we've gotten votes for the coalition of partners, the design guidelines, sit-down restaurants, historic assets and destinations, and then a vacant storefront program. So a nice cross section across those. So I will end the poll. Thank you for that. I'll just share this back so you can all see that real quick too.
You could only do one.
Yeah, we made it
I
tough.
tried to jump around, so mine bounced. Apologies.
No problem. Sorry. We really took prioritization to heart and only let you have one dot in this case for that priority. But we're just trying to see where we may not end up using, because the process has effectively prioritized all of these as we've gone along. So we may not in the end do any sort of advanced meta prioritization, as I called it, but well, it's just good to see where people think about these ideas.
Josh, it strikes me that, we have a very small polling group. We almost would like to have the opportunity to try to expand the participation in a poll like that.
Yes, we have. I don't think I mentioned it, Bill, since you joined, but for this meeting, we have, it's being recorded, so we'll put the recording out and try to get it a little more widely disseminated. But we also have a companion Qualtrics poll, an online poll that has these same questions that hopefully people will pick up and respond to us, so we can hear a little bit broader perspective on where some of the priorities are.
Thank you. Sorry for having to join late.
No problem. I heard you were doing great work on behalf of the waterfront and the wharfs. So let me move along here to resilience, strength and vitality and sustainability. So we had under this, the district parking guidelines for visitors, business and events, which is a little bit of an adjustment. Previously it was a parking management plan, but I've softened that a little bit, but kept that idea in. And then adding sustainability and resilience guidance and checklist, and considering development incentives linked to sustainability and resilience. So here's a little more meat to those ideas. And it's not necessarily a district parking plan, but there were some things that we discussed in previous meetings that I think would be helpful to continue to have in the report and to pursue, namely encouraging business owners and employees to use parking spaces that are in those larger supply areas. So the Station Street lot, for example, and then also directing visitors to those lots which have the higher capacity, and people would be sure to find a spot. So that would relate to the wayfinding program as well. And then, oh, sorry, Marco, yes.
Just a quick comment on that. So we did some studies in prior years on this, and one of the big offenders, if you will, is the realtors in town. And so there's allegedly something like back in the day, and it's probably no longer true, but there were 200 real estate agents in downtown Hingham, and they used up a lot of that parking. And so as the real estate business moves to more and more online, I think we can see those real estate offices downtown shrinking. And so that whole parking problem may sort of mitigate itself without us doing a whole lot about it.
That's great insight. Thanks for that. And adding sustainability and resilience guidance checklist, and here some of the bullet points there offer a little more detail. So elevating and flood-proofing buildings, elevating the critical infrastructure of buildings over time and making those investments, improving the thermal efficiency of buildings through the windows, insulation, and other measures, improving the heating and cooling efficiency through the systems and equipment that's used, and then adding renewable energy resources to buildings and reducing the water use and stormwater runoff. So that's a pretty well-rounded list there in terms of the types of approaches. And then linked to those guidelines, there could also be some incentives to consider that we need to sharpen our pencils a little bit to give some concrete suggestions, but it might include things like a density bonus, where if you do go above and beyond in terms of sustainability and resilience in a structure, then perhaps you can do a little bit more on your property than you might otherwise. Or another approach would be to reduce parking requirements if those sustainability and resilience requirements are elevated. Those might not be the right options, but we'll put out some options that can be considered. The other approach would be you occasionally see some trade-offs like that for the inclusion of affordable housing to a higher percentage of what might otherwise be required. And then rounding out the resilience and sustainability strategies, we have new amenities integrated with flood protection, and then integrating stormwater enhancements and new landscaping with each of the improvements. So the first one really is building on an approach which you all have already implemented and undertaken, but just expanding that to make a more continuous flood barrier along the waterfront on the water side of Route 3A. So I think this is the more viable approach given the contemplations around like elevating the entire roadway and things like that, and the cascading effects that something like that would have. This is a incremental bite-sized approach, which I think is also successful when sort of continued. And then we'll be working closely with Ann Herbst, our senior environmental planner, to think through stormwater enhancements, where and how those should occur, and what the characteristics of those should be. But you can see on the screen a rain garden, which can be integrated into a small parklet or curbed parking area, that sort of thing. And then also looking for ways just to integrate new landscaping. Back when Darcy was on the project and presented earlier in one of the meetings, you recall perhaps the discussion around the heat island effect and how there are elevated temperatures in this part of Hingham. And so anywhere we can put new shade trees or other landscaping will help to ameliorate that effect, which is caused by an increase of the paved surfaces radiating heat. So we'll put in some additional details around those. And then the same exercise, we've got the smaller list of these strategies compared to the last one, but nonetheless, you have only one choice still for prioritizing this group, which you should have on your screen now. Oh, sorry, I think I just did the wrong. Let me end that. I think I might have just did the wrong one. Oh, it looks like. Well, that's too bad. So I'm not sure. I think this is right on the or we'll make sure it's right on the Qualtrics survey, but it looks like I actually have a duplicate of this poll instead of the other. So maybe what we should do here, there's only 6. So if you can see the screen of the presentation still, these are actually the wrong, I don't have the right list in the poll format here. But if you wouldn't mind humoring us, if you can match it up with what's on the screen in terms of 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and just go down. So for example, if you click the first dot, it would be for developing district parking guidelines for visitors, business, and events. If you click the second dot, it would be for adding sustainability and resilience guidance. The third dot would be consider development incentives linked to sustainability and resilience. The fourth dot would be new amenities. The fifth dot would be improvements for stormwater. And the sixth dot would be improvements for landscaping, if that makes sense.
Where are these dots? I'm not seeing where we can mark our choice.
There should be a little dot next to.
Now, some of us closed the window. I closed it when it was the wrong questions and now it's gone. So I don't know what to do. Maybe Bill did the same thing.
Maybe folks can add it to the chat. Would that be?
Yeah, let's do that instead. That's a good idea, Yolanda. Thanks for thinking on your feet. The poll will be better for the next one because it's right. But for this one, let's just do that. If you, whatever you prefer, let's put the number into the chat. Yeah, like so 5.2, 5.3, or 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, etc. Apologize for that, but we maybe just never got back to correcting that poll. So looks like we have good support for the sustainability and resilience guidance and checklist, which would be a part of district design guidelines. And then also the consider development incentives linked to sustainability and resilience. And new amenities should be integrated with flood protection measures. So thank you for that. Sorry for the little confusion there. We'll press along to the final set of strategies, which were about the public realm and open space goals. So the first, we've talked about already in this meeting, maybe about refining this language a little bit. Presently, it's improve safety and decrease vehicular speed. It will probably migrate to be a little bit more directly about walkability and multimodal access, which I think is where we'd like it to head. But it includes specifically advancing the Route 3A improvements, making sure that those are just supported in every way in terms of the town's plans. And then considering implementing short-term improvements for the Route 3A areas as well. So you can see those two, a little more details of those on the screen. So again, I think I said 2024 previously in this presentation, but it looks like what I've recorded here is 2025 for the construction year potentially. So there are a few years between now and then, which would make 7.2. Potentially some of those actions could be undertaken, not necessarily all of them, but there were a collection of short-term ideas to help in the interim in terms of walkability and safety. And then this was the diagram I mentioned earlier, just about contemplating how to improve the multimodal access for this district. As we mentioned, the T stops, the commuter rail stops and the ferry stops are just outside of the 1 mile radius, which is a little bit bigger than the typical walking catchment for a transit station. But it's not that bad for a bike ride. And so I was looking at the viable connections between those locations and our district. And so, for example, improving the path and some signage and wayfinding along South Street to get from the West Hingham station to the district looks like it's viable. There's a path that's there today. It could use maybe a little improvement or potentially widening in some locations. And then same thing on Summer Street to get you out to the Route 3A path from the Nantasket Junction stop. And then getting over to the Hingham Shipyard it would be a similar scenario if you looked at the paths along Lincoln Street. So there could be some improvements of that stretch of path and some signage to make those connections. If you were to follow along Otis Street along the water's edge on 3A and then follow 3A over to Lincoln Street, closer to the shipyard, that connection that I've highlighted in red there is missing connection. There's no, that would have to be a brand new built connection in terms of a pathway for that multimodal access. So probably the ones in yellow, I would guess are the easier approach in terms of making some improvements, particularly I think with some signage to say, if you get off at this stop and you want to get yourself on a bike or by walking into Hingham downtown or the waterfront, this is the direction you head, and then just do that along the way. Where, Marco, you had mentioned a rail right of way. Where would that fall approximately on this diagram?
So that runs effectively from, well, it's sort of behind Beale Cove there, but from where the Stop and Shop is, when you come off 3A, all the way down to West Street. And then it sort of stops, connected back, I guess, to the original railroad track.
Okay, I'll take a look for that, and I'll highlight that on this map too.
I was going to talk about that a little more. The railroad right-of-way actually runs from West Street, well, probably ran through the marshland down to the tracks, runs along Beale Street up to almost to Fotler Street, and then cuts across behind Fotler Street and crosses there. And I don't know where it crossed 3A, but it's pretty direct. And that's something that I've wanted to see some attention to for a long time, although I think it's a little out of scope for this. Having a combined bicycle pedestrian path from the West Hingham Station to the shipyard should be a priority for the town, I would think. And I think it's doable. So if you go on Beale Street, you'll see the track there. A lot of it's still in place.
Great. I'll take a look for that and see what we can do. Deirdre, you have a hand.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I find that fascinating. I want to look at an aerial and see that, Marco. That's amazing. Josh, I wanted to ask if in your other MAPC work or anybody else in your orbit, when you have seen, I'm thinking along that Route 3A connection where you have it in red, where you have seen maybe a boardwalk, bike lane, in a flood district, waterfront, dropped into a community to make a critical connection, because that really could solve so many issues along that corridor if we, maybe relocated the Lobster Pound and the Bear Cove Dance Hall. It's just so critical to get commuters, and it would be more direct than this Beale Cove, train right of way. But it right now is one of the hairiest parts of, you wouldn't want to see any cyclist or bike or pedestrians on that route. Right. And I daydream about it because I think, what could we ever do along the water that would be sustainable, even though it is in a floodplain and in marshland?
A raised boardwalk, Deirdre.
I mean, that's really what I'm looking for you to tell me you've worked on in other towns.
I think they're a little, they're rare, but I do think they exist. I can't think of, I want to say that it's not a waterfront community, but I think that the town of Ashland does have a portion of a bikeway on a critical connection. I think on Route 126, I want to say it is, that is an elevated boardwalk type bike path across the wetland. But let me think about that and see if we can highlight some examples in the document. But I think you're right, to make this more of a network, which is always what you want to see. You don't want to see just one option for making these connections, but to make it more of a multimodal network, that is a missing link. But I think what I might suggest in terms of short-term connectivity is that making sure the yellow ones are functioning right are probably the priority, but then having some ideas about how to make the red, at least turn that into a yellow link over time would be ideal. if not making that also a green link, like that stretch of improvements along Summer Street that will be a part of the.
I have another question, because why isn't Lincoln Street on there from the Lincoln House to where it gets down to the intersection with the three-way intersection where the police station used to be? That's a natural pedestrian and bike route, and it's not subject to 3A, which was a new street basically. And then from there, there should be some open land between there and the end of the walkway at the shipyard, which runs all the way to the edge of the peninsula, and then it's supposed to go up through some conservation land. So there's a smaller gap there than you think.
We can look into that too.
And you can look at the town GIS. It's actually a little easier if you look at that to see where these connections could be.
I would emphasize, Josh, that the missing connection piece would probably have to be on the south side of 3A. I think Deirdre's right. There you have two businesses, but one is a parking lot, which could maybe accommodate, both measures. Whereas on the north side, toward Otis Street, you have 5 or 6 individual homes with very little frontage, no space at all.
Okay. Yeah, to put this together a little, some of the things I was looking at too, MAPC has what's called the landline, which is a multimodal look at the entire region, where our bike expert and advocate David Lotzenheiser has actually looked around the region for existing and missing bicycle connections everywhere, in every municipality. And I must say that there's not actually much by way of that regional planning in terms of highlighted bike connections that would fill in the pieces here. So I did have to go looking a little bit on my own about what would make sense. But I think once you kind of make some of these more local connections, then there is potential to connect into that broader landline network, as David calls it, from our office. All right, so we will include this thinking for sure in our reporting, and I think fit it here in terms of the goals and strategies, and maybe adjust the language as we've discussed, Katie and Deirdre in the earlier conversation around making sure that multimodal access and walkability are called out a little more specifically. And then this was the other item, which I think clearly relates to walkability, making sure there's more, increasing the spaces devoted to people. So identifying strategic locations for the removal of on-street parking to expand outdoor space and amenity. I think what we'll do is give some suggestions for locations that can occur. I'm looking at North Street as a primary candidate, with the parking it has on its east side, and then recalibrating the parking requirements to promote new activities and redevelopment. So that's more looking at the zoning side of things. But here you see some bullets there. And I think this is something that the 8.1 is something that can be a permanent approach with curbing, or it can just be a temporary approach, as a lot of communities have had with great success in the outdoor dining COVID times, where they just put a few cones out, or a more what's sometimes called tactical urbanist sort of approach, where you do a temporary makeshift setup to create a small outdoor dining space. And then for the calibration of the parking requirements, reducing the residential parking requirement potentially below the 2 spaces per unit, increasing the shared parking reduction for mixed use projects, or looking at other ways just to add some flexibility there. So it's not parking, which is the dominant feature of the district, but it's the activities that parking supports. Then we have integrating history, arts, and culture as a goal, another goal within the public realm. Linking the historic assets through a walking tour with the wayfinding information. That's something that has been with us as an idea all along, that you all are keen on. And then integrating public art into public realm improvements, and designing simple, consistent features that are part of the district identity. So some notions of what that may be here. So we'll, I think, really elevate the approach which is already taken with the series of signs along the waterfront in terms of the style and approach with the historic narrative. And think of potentially some other locations where that network of information could be expanded. Integrating public, there is already locations, of course, with public art integrated into the public realm of the district. So just making that a hallmark of what's happening and expanding. There could be, we'll discuss probably in the report, I'm not sure, I'll see if there's examples regionally of municipalities that do this. I think there are a couple. I'll talk to our arts and culture department, but the percent for art sort of approach where you tack a small percentage of capital improvements of a certain percentage of that project has to be devoted to a public art that's integrated into the project. That's been a very successful way to do this. And that can be connected to local artists in terms of the participants. And then the simple and consistent features like the granite posts, the landscape accents, which already exist, just expanding those into other areas. The area which is a little further north along North Street toward the waterfront could benefit from some of those same features which are down in the Hingham Square area. And then I guess the branding idea wasn't supported as broadly, but I did still mention the notion of some feature like a district logo or other historic sort of artifacts that you sometimes see, like something significant that happened in the district is memorialized through a small, some bronze pieces which are inlaid into the sidewalk in certain locations or something like that. That's a little bit of icing on the cake, but as the district evolves, I think those would be something that could really add another layer of interest to the public realm. And then lastly, kind of branching off from there into elevating the district identity and its consistency. So continuing the streetscape character and features throughout the district, increasing their uniformity and connectivity, particularly the sidewalk network, and then the focus on consistent wayfinding. And here you can see some of those details. So the items that we've picked up on in terms of the streetscape character are either red brick sidewalks or concrete sidewalks with a red brick accent band, painted red crosswalk with thick white lined edges, street trees in the sidewalk that have tree grates if they're in the sidewalk. If not, they don't. Antique street lights, the same granite post accents I just mentioned. And then there are some places where the sidewalk network is lacking. So I think Water Street was one of them. There are some other locations where we'll highlight really focusing on the sidewalk connectivity itself and make some suggestions about short-term improvements or temporary solutions, and then getting those established as curbed walkways eventually. And then we use the example in terms of wayfinding signage. A nearby neighbor down in Situate, the Situate Harbor, they have a municipal parking lot on Cole Parkway there that they've done a pretty good job in terms of defining wayfinding for getting to that parking area. They went maybe a little overboard in terms of regulations of that parking area. If you've been there, they've got a lot of signs that depict sort of 2 hour versus 3 hour versus 4 hour versus 5 hour. But I think that approach where you have a district brand associated on the wayfinding signage that gets you directly to where you want visitors to be, and that would be a really beneficial approach, both for the bicycles, I think coming from some of the transit areas we just looked at on the diagram, and for getting arriving vehicles to the right locations in the car. All right, so this is the last poll that is on all the strategies we just talked about. We do have the right information this time. So it should be up on your screen now. So which of those do you think is?
I don't have the poll popping up.
Maybe on if you just look on the controls across the bottom of your screen, maybe you see polling. Do you see polling?
Let me try to pull it in my other.
Sometimes it hides
Oh,
behind another.
I found it. Okay, I moved it over to my off my monitor. Thank you.
No problem. All right, it's like we've got our responses back. So sharing that back with you all, we have advancing the Route 3A improvements, a major priority for sure. Identifying locations to strategically remove on-street parking to expand outdoor space and amenity. Got a vote. 2 votes for linking historic assets through a walking tour with wayfinding and information. Then 2 votes for increasing uniformity and connectivity of the sidewalk network in the district and beyond. And then 1 vote for continuing the streetscape character throughout the district. So thank you for that. We will keep those in mind. So putting this all together. And we'll combine them with any other results we receive with the online poll. So this isn't fully worked out yet, but one of the other things that we're doing that I've hinted to as talking through some of the strategies is we are trying to, we've been thinking about each of these strategies spatially. So where they're occurring physically within this geography, and have done just a first pass at thinking about that distribution. Many of them do apply to the entire area. So whether that be sort of a zoning approach, I'm not expecting anyone to be able to make sense out of this diagram just yet, but we will be showing spatially in the report where there's a spatial aspect to some of these recommendations to say, here's where, if we're talking about missing sidewalk link, here is where the missing sidewalk link is, and identify that for you all. And the other exercise here was just to make sure that the spatial distribution of the strategies and recommendations were not overly biased toward one section of the district or another, and to make sure that we were sort of comprehensively looking at this area. And it appears so that is the case, that we're looking at all corners. So there's not a poll associated with this, but just an open invitation to raise any other questions or thoughts. If you have any, you can either just verbally, we're a small enough group, we can just have verbal discussion about it, or if you want to, you can put some in the chat. Yes, Marco.
Josh, just more information for you. The Harbor Development and Bathing Beach committees have asked for, or trustees rather, have asked for CPC for a grant to more particularly define a master plan specific to the harbor. So it's going to tie in directly to this study, plus the work that's been done with the 3A study committee. And it's really envisioned as the final link to really get into the details of the harbor. So
that's great.
As an FYI, and we're very aware that all of these things have to link together so that there's no duplicity involved.
That's great. Yeah, I know when this process first started and you all had been seeking some of, had RFPs out for various landscape architecture firms and things, that this wasn't exactly the same sort of approach, and we weren't able to get into as many of the details as you might be able to in such a process with a different type of consultant. So that would be really helpful to fill in the gaps.
I have a question.
Yes.
I didn't see any mention, I'm sorry I didn't know about the other meetings before, about we still have overhead wires at the edges of this district. The most annoying ones are the ones that go over, that get mixed up with the Lincoln statue. Now that the town has bought the house, should be some thought to get the wires out of that little square. And the other is the wires that pick up and go overhead along the edge of 3A to the rotary, which I think when they're digging trenches, they should be able to get, at least put conduit in if they can't get them wired up right away. There's not that many abutters to it, but it is visually a problem. Most of the other area, I think, has already got buried wires, but those two areas don't. But that's really a question for Deirdre also, whether or not you've had any brushes with the Hingham Light before over this issue.
Not, it hasn't come up with regards to the Benjamin Lincoln House at Fountain Square. It has recently come up with regards to the 3A project, but more specifically at a different point in the project on Summer Street, and the, you know, what would ever be the opportunity to bury some lines to avoid easements that this state is going to need for utilities. And the answer to burying lines was a definitive no, because of costs. Does that answer your question, Clark?
Yeah, I know it's cost, but I still don't think that that's the same as no.
I know, and I'm with you, and Bill will tell you I asked it 3 times in the same meeting, but I don't know. My question is the same as Marco's, Josh and team, is how we take all this good work and the money that the Harbor Development Committee has been awarded, or hopefully at town meeting will be awarded through CPC funds, to you know, basically have create a punch list and align grant money to that punch list for getting some of these initiatives implemented.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. But I do. Yeah. The Lincoln statue, I think, is also, that's a, people have complained to me about that and the wires.
You complain about the Lincoln statue in what way, Clark?
The wires overhanging it, they're brushing Lincoln's head
Oh, okay. Got it.
as they go right over it.
Are there any grant? Sorry, Josh, I see you as a crystal ball in all things planning and community building, space making. Are there any grants out in the world for burying utility lines?
You know, burying utilities is a pretty frequent topic of discussion, so I probably should have a better answer for it. But it is, I mean, it is a costly endeavor on a linear foot basis. I forget what the figure is, but it's pretty high. So it oftentimes gets deprioritized or kind of put off the list. But I would say that the for better or worse, the approach, which to my mind has a little more legs in terms of burying utilities, are from the resilience aspects of things. And if communities are having overhead power lines through storms or other, you know, increased storm events related to climate change, then that's the direction that actually I think there's more activity and action to burying power lines to make them more resilient, and get them into sort of the flood-proof conduit that they could be underground. So I guess it's probably not it's a bittersweet sort of comment, but probably until there is an issue with more storm-related utility issues, given the overhead location on particularly the coastally susceptible spots you have there, then until that starts to become a more frequent issue, I would think it will be a pretty heavy resistance in terms of pursuing the overhead utility burying. I don't know of offhand a grant source which is making this happen for a lot of places.
Josh, we're served by our own electric company, and I think we have probably among the most reliable electric connections of any state in this town. So that's a hard battle to fight.
All right, did I see miss anyone else? Did I see any other hands go up?
I just wanted to follow up on it. You asked the question about pedestrian path to Hewitt's Cove. And it looks to me, I looked at the map, I put a comment, looks like there's a fairly, most of a route exists if you could figure out how to get past that nursing home complex between the end of the path at Hewitt's Cove by the condos and getting over in the vicinity of Lincoln Street. And so don't even think about putting the bicycles on 3A if you can get them off of 3A and get them over, and then they can go along the harbor.
Great, I'll take a look at that. Thank you, Clark.
Yeah, it's pretty apparent. And also look at the town GIS. There you can see where the railroad right of way went. And I think that's also something you should look at because that's a connection to the West Hingham station. And when you drive your car to a parking lot in the morning and you take a train or the boat and then you stay too late and find out you can't get home on that mode, then how do you get back to the other station?
That's a good question.
It's, I call that the freight end problem, and we have it in spades because Nantasket Junction is another one. So a shuttle that would connect the transit stations, at least on weekends. So look at the bus from Waikiki to the beach or something like that as a model, where on the weekends they run bus service, and it should run from Hingham as well as in Hull to the beach and bring people back so that they can go to restaurants and do things like that in Hingham Square, particularly on marginal beach days. So, I mean, we are linked to a larger tourist area. We should take advantage of that.
Great, thanks for those comments, Clark. I also see in the chat the notion of public charging stations for electric vehicles. I think that's a great idea. We can include that idea in the sustainability and resilience guidelines, that should be something that is coming along. Will become a more prominent feature of the public realm to have those conveniently located.
But that will be expensive to do also because of the undergrounding.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments on our work this evening? Okay, so
Josh,
yeah, Marco.
what will the final report look like? Is it a slide deck? Is it a physical report?
Yeah, I think in this case, it will be a report that can be printed. I don't think it will necessarily be, it will be delivered to you all in the town in a digital format, but you could make it physical easy enough. I think the final product will be a PDF designed, I'm imagining sort of a letter-sized 8.5 by 11 sort of document that will be formatted more as a document and less as a slideshow. So it will be something that will basically walk you through in this next meeting, but that it will be hopefully be pretty self-explanatory. It will lay out the process from end to end, what we did, how we gathered information, but then it will put together these goals and strategies, and hopefully a way that's compelling enough for people to want to act on it all.
And Josh, just to confirm, because I wasn't here at the beginning, the next meeting is still April 21st?
No, I do not believe that's the right date. I think it's a May date. Let me I think I have it on a slide here, just one moment. And one of the things we mentioned at the beginning too is we'll redouble our efforts. I think that this, with the transition with Mary, the outreach for this meeting was a little lax, and Yolanda and I will brainstorm and make sure that we get connected with the right distribution measures in the town to get the word out about that last meeting. And we'll also get the word out about, do the same sort of footwork and legwork to get this online survey. So Bill, as you mentioned, having a little bit broader audience to plug into this meta prioritization would be helpful. All of the Zoom polling that we did in this evening's meeting is duplicated in a online survey. It's a Qualtrics survey as the survey provider. So we have that link, which is on the screen now, but we'll also make sure that link gets posted on the town website with the recording of tonight's meeting. and the presentation from tonight. So that will hopefully broaden our reach a little bit. And then the final meeting is, I have it on my calendar as May 5th at 7 p.m. And then if you also wouldn't mind too helping, if you have some stakeholders, friends, neighbors that you think would be interested in this, you could pass the poll along to them. And then our next step is to, we basically have all of this, the goal, the vision statement, the goals, the strategies compiled, narrowed, and prioritized in some manner by you all. And we'll be trying to, we have some of the details as you saw in those bullets this evening, but making sure that we get all of that formatted and a little further detailed so that you can have hopefully some items to run with for each of those strategies. And then I think we'll basically be releasing that as a draft plan on that May 5th meeting. And then you all can have some time with it to review it and then give us back comments and feedback about how to give one last round of final improvements on those ideas.
Josh, can I suggest, I think Mary's, the trouble is none of us have been in town hall, so we don't know who's there now. But Mary had an assistant who was pretty good, actually. And I believe Mary must have had a list of people that she was sending out your invites to these earlier meetings. And I'm hoping that her assistant might be able to access that list.
Yeah, I'll talk with her. I've been coordinating with Sherry Robertson in the town hall. So I'll see if we can refine that connection with her. And then the other name which I have is Emily Wentworth,
Yes.
who's working there now in, I think, sort of an interim way in Mary's position.
That's
Hey,
right.
Josh, I would focus on Emily at this stage. We're in a bit of transition. We have a part-time planning professional that's helping in the planning office in the interim. As luck would have it, Sherry also found a new position and has moved from the planning office as well. So it's a little bit of bubblegum and baling wire right now in the planning efforts, but we're continuing to keep everything on track, both from a planning board perspective. But if I can help at all, give me a shout and we'll try to connect you and be sure that we kind of broadcast certainly the final meeting a bit more so we can get the more usual number of folks that you've been able to draw for these meetings for the last one.
That's
Thanks,
great. Appreciate that. All right, so with that, I think we have gotten through our program this evening. I thank you all for participating again and seeing you all. Appreciate again the consistency of the group coming along throughout this process. And as we say, we'll make sure to redouble our efforts and get the word out for the final push here, and hope to have you all join us again on May 5th. And we will work with Emily to get these materials posted and hopefully broaden the reach of the recording this meeting. So with that, thank you again, and we'll wish you all a good night.
Good
Thank you,
evening.
Josh.